Welcome. Today in our animated Bible answers, we shall go through Colossians chapter 2 verse 16. Our title is Colossians 2:14 to 16 debunked. Reading the text from Paul, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of an holiday, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days. Many have used this text to discredit, debunk, rebuke, and throw away the Sabbath. But was Paul giving room for this in his address to the Colossae? Stay tuned as we go through this answer. Let's read two verses prior, that is Colossians 2:14 and 15. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holiday, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days. Now let's read while identifying key points in these texts. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holiday, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days. The key points we have identified in these texts: number one, handwriting of ordinances against us, contrary to us, nailing it to the cross, meat or drink, and holiday, and the Sabbath days. So where else do we read about ordinances in the Bible? We read from Ephesians chapter 2, and the verse is 15. Bible says, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, having abolished. We read from Deuteronomy 31 verse 24, and the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book. Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. Deuteronomy 31:24 continues, and it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law, and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. So the commandment was there for a witness against thee. Why was it against them? Why was it against them? Moses says, for I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck. Ye have been rebellious against the Lord, and now how much more after my death. So Moses knew the rebellion of his people and how much more it would be after his death. That's why the book of the law was written and put on the sides of the ark. Moses commanded to put the book in the side of the ark. What then was in the ark? So to speak, what then was in the ark? We answer, what was in the ark? Exodus 25 verse 16. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. In the ark was put the testimony which the Lord gave to Moses. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony. The testimony was put in the ark, not anywhere else but in the ark. So then we realize, he says, and he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded to you to perform, even 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. God wrote them upon tables of stone. And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides, on the one side and on the other side were they written, tables of stone from the hands of the Lord. Exodus 32 verse 15. Verse 16. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. Exodus 32 verse 16. How were the tables written on? Bible says, and the Lord delivered unto me 2 tables of stone written with the finger of God. These tables of stone were written with the finger of God. Deuteronomy 9 verse 10. How were these tables written on? As we continue to answer. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of the testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. So the tables of stone were written with the finger of God, not by Moses' hand, but by the finger of God. Exodus 31 verse 38. So then, talking about meat or drink, Paul quotes from a portion in Ezekiel 45 verse 17, referring to meats and drinks. Paul quotes from a portion in Ezekiel 45 verse 17, and it shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings and meat offerings and drink offerings in the feasts and in the new moons and in the Sabbaths. So Paul here identifies burnt offerings, meat offerings, identifies drink offerings, the feasts, the new moons, the Sabbaths. All those Paul outlines them as he quotes from Ezekiel 45 verse 17. What are these Sabbaths? We ask then. What are these Sabbaths that Paul was referring to? Paul says they were Sabbaths which pointed to something. They were a shadow, Paul says in verse 16. So, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So Paul outlines that these Sabbaths were a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ's. For example, we had the 7th year Sabbath, where they would leave the land resting on the 7th year after cultivating for 6 years. We have the Feast of Tabernacles was one of the Sabbaths. We have the Trumpet Sabbath. We have, and many of them, the Day of Atonement, it was also a Sabbath. So ceremonial Sabbath days came after sin. But of the 7th day it is said, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me, say, and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Back to our key points, we have looked at the handwriting of ordinances. Then we shall look at the next key point as we are addressing this issue. That was against us. We will deal together with contrary to us. So we ask the question then, was the Sabbath against us? Was the Sabbath day against us? Isaiah 58 verse 13 says, if thou turn thy foot away from my Sabbaths, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. So the Lord calls us to call the Sabbath a day of delight, to joy and enjoy the Sabbath day. It was never a burden, but rather a blessing. Colossians still, we see the Sabbath was not against us, it was us to delight in it. We address then another about nailing it to the cross. Was the Sabbath nailed to the cross? We ask again, was the Sabbath nailed to the cross? That is the question we are going to address next as we answer Colossians 2:16. Was the Sabbath nailed to the cross? Well, to answer that, we shall just look at the history of the Apostles' Church, which was there immediately after the cross. Did it keep the Sabbath or it did not? We see several times about Sabbath keeping in the Church of the Apostles. Acts 13:42, Acts 13:44, Acts 15:21, Acts 16:13, Acts 17 verse 2, Acts 18 verse 4. And mind you, and all these are acts of the apostles. They are acts of the Apostles' Church, which took place decades after the cross. Literally, I am saying 10 plus years after 31 AD, when Jesus had gone to heaven, they still observed the Sabbath. Did Gentiles keep the Sabbath in the New Testament times? We shall see. Did Paul, in order to answer that question, we ask ourselves first, did Paul keep the Sabbath? And anyway, did Paul establish Sabbath-keeping churches? We ask ourselves those questions. When we answer, we'll have a final answer, whether the Sabbath day is binding or not. Acts 13 is one of Paul's instances of Sabbath keeping. Verse 14. Verse 42 is another. Acts 13:44 is another. Acts 16:14 is another. 16:13. Acts 17:2 is another. And Acts 18:4 is another portion where Paul is recorded observing the Sabbath. Acts 13:14 he was in Antioch. 13:42 he was in Antioch. 13:44 he was in Antioch. 16:13 he was in Philippi. 17:2 he was in Thessalonians. 18:4 he was in Corinthia. And in all those places Paul kept the Sabbath, and he established Sabbath-keeping churches in those places. No wonder Jesus expected his New Testament church to keep the Sabbath 39 years after his ascension. How do we know? Matthew 24 verse 20. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. This was a look into the future. At the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, he tells them to pray that they are not attacked or they don't flee on the Sabbath day. When did this happen? It was in 70 AD when Rome attacked Israel that Jerusalem was destroyed. Jesus expected his people to keep the Sabbath even 40 years from his ascension. Jesus says to you today, without doubt, you have seen evidence that truly the New Testament church kept the Sabbath beyond the cross. Jesus says unto you today, if you love me, keep my commandments. And one of the commandments is the fourth commandment. Is kept because we love him. If you love me, keep my commandments. And Paul says to you also, there remains therefore a Sabbath rest to the people of God. If you are truly a person of God, Paul says there remains a Sabbath rest to you. And verse 10 says, those who rest as God rested from his works. Praise God always.